Welcome back to Tina Romance Library, where powerful alphas fall hard, and the women they underestimate change everything. Every story here is complete, immersive, and emotion-driven. No cliffhangers, no rushed endings, just full romances you can sink into. So if you love possessive alphas, strong heroines who don't beg, slow burn tension, emotional payoffs, and stories that actually finish, you're in the right place. I need you to join the pack right now by subscribing. Leave a like if you enjoy immersive romance. And settle in because once the story begins, we don't stop until the ending. Now, let's get into it. They warned me about him the moment I arrived at the palace gates. "Don't speak," the head maid hissed, her fingers digging into my arm as she dragged me through corridors so grand they made me feel like a smudge on polished marble. "Don't touch anything. And for the love of the moon goddess, don't let him notice you. I'm Ivy. Just Ivy. No grand title, no pact to claim me, no lineage worth mentioning. I'm an Omega, the lowest rung on the ladder in a world obsessed with hierarchy and power. My job? To be invisible. To clean, to serve, to fade into the background like wallpaper that nobody bothers to look at twice. I was trained for this my whole life. Omegas don't make waves. We don't draw attention. We survive by being forgettable. But here's the thing nobody tells you about trying to disappear. It's a lot harder when someone's actually looking. The first time I saw Alpha King Alexander, I thought I'd walked into a nightmare wrapped in expensive fabric. He was massive. Not just tall, though, he towered over every single person in that throne room, but broad, solid, like he'd been carved from stone by someone who believed kings should look like mountains. His presence filled the space in a way that made the air feel thicker, heavier. People moved around him like water around a boulder, careful not to get too close, as if proximity alone might crush them. But it wasn't his size that made my heart stutter in my chest. It was his stillness. He sat on that throne like a statue, utterly motionless, watching the court unfold before him with eyes so dark they looked black in the dim light. Advisors shouted, nobles bickered, guards stamped their feet. And through it all, Alexander didn't flinch, didn't blink, didn't react. At first, I thought it was control, the kind of terrifying self-discipline that comes from being the most powerful man in the realm, someone who doesn't need to respond to lesser wolves because their opinions don't matter. Then I noticed the way his eyes moved. He wasn't ignoring them. He was reading them, watching their lips, their gestures, their body language with an intensity that made my skin prickle. And that's when I understood. He couldn't hear them. The Alpha King, the man every wolf in the kingdom feared, the ruler who commanded armies and held the fate of thousands in his hands, was deaf. My chest tightened with something I wasn't expecting. Not pity, exactly. Pity would have been condescending, and this man didn't inspire condescension. No, what I felt was something deeper. Something that crept under my ribs and settled there like an ache I couldn't name. Loneliness. Here was a king surrounded by voices, drowning in noise and opinion, and the endless chatter of a court that needed him to lead them. And yet he lived in complete silence. Cut off, isolated, alone in a way that had nothing to do with how many people filled the room. I know what it's like to be invisible, but he was visible to everyone and truly seen by no one. The head maid shoved me toward a corner near the throne, her voice barely a whisper. "Keep your head down. Polish the candelabras. Don't make a sound." As if I had a choice. As if I'd ever made a sound that mattered. I got to work, keeping my movements small, efficient. I've always been good at this, at shrinking myself down to nothing, at blending into the shadows. I'm like furniture, really. The kind of chair you sit in every day but never actually notice. Useful, sure, but unremarkable. Except something was wrong. I could feel it, a prickling awareness crawling up the back of my neck, raising the fine hairs on my arms, the sensation of being watched. I told myself I was imagining it, that I was being paranoid. Why would anyone watch me? I was nothing. Nobody. But when I risked a glance toward the throne, just a quick flicker of my eyes, barely a second my breath caught. He was looking at me, not at the nobles arguing in front of him, not at the guards flanking the doors, not at the advisors waving scrolls and demanding his attention. At me. His gaze was fixed on my hands as I worked, following the movement of my fingers over the tarnished silver with an intensity that made my pulse spike. His expression hadn't changed, still that same unreadable mask of control, but his eyes were locked on me like I was the only thing in the room worth watching. I froze. My heart hammered so hard I was sure everyone could hear it, even if he couldn't. Heat flooded my cheeks, and I quickly looked away, focusing on the candelabra like my life depended on it. Maybe it did. Maybe whatever I'd just felt was dangerous. Maybe being noticed by the Alpha King was the worst thing that could happen to someone like me. But even as I scrubbed and polished, even as I kept my head down and my movements careful, I could still feel it. That weight, that attention. He was still watching. The court session dragged on for what felt like hours. Disputes over territory, complaints about trade routes, petitions from minor pacts seeking favor. Through it all, Alexander sat in silence, his dark eyes moving from face to face, reading lips and intentions with a precision that was almost unnerving. And every so often, his gaze would drift back to me. Not obviously. Not in a way anyone else would notice. But I felt it every single time. A pull, like gravity. Like some invisible thread had been tied between us, and he was tugging on it, testing its strength. Why? Why would the most powerful alpha alive, a king who could have anyone and anything he wanted, waste even a second of his attention on a lowly Omega Maid? I didn't have an answer, but as I finished my work and slipped toward the exit, careful to keep my head bowed, I couldn't shake the feeling that had settled deep in my bones. He'd noticed me. And somehow I knew with absolute certainty that everything was about to change. Because in a court full of wolves desperate to be seen, to be heard, to matter, I'd spent my whole life learning how to disappear. But Alpha King Alexander had looked right through my invisibility. And for the first time in my life, I wondered if being invisible was actually what I wanted. Or if maybe, just maybe, I wanted him to keep looking. I made it 3 days before everything fell apart. 3 days of keeping my head down, doing my work, and pretending I didn't feel his eyes on me every single time I entered that throne room. 3 days of telling myself I was imagining things, that an Alpha King had better things to do than track the movements of an insignificant Omega Maid. 3 days of lying to myself. Because the truth I didn't want to admit was that I felt him watching me the same way I felt storms coming, instinctively, inevitably. Like something written into my bones. And there was something else. Something I'd been trying desperately to ignore since the moment I first saw him. The wrongness. I have this ability. Curse maybe. Gift. Depending on who you ask. I can feel physical wrongness in people. Not emotions. I'm not some kind of empath who senses feelings. It's more clinical than that. More visceral. I can feel when something in someone's body isn't right. A broken bone that didn't set properly. An infection festering under the skin. Scar tissue pressing where it shouldn't. My mother had it too, before she died. She used to say it was the moon goddess's way of making sure Omegas had something useful to offer. A survival mechanism for wolves who couldn't fight, couldn't lead, couldn't protect themselves with strength. I learned early not to talk about it. The first time I mentioned it when I was maybe 7, I told a pack healer that the beta's daughter had something wrong with her stomach. Dark and twisted, like roots growing where they shouldn't. The healer laughed at me, called me presumptuous, said Omegas don't have gifts, only delusions. 2 weeks later, the beta's daughter collapsed. Tumor. Inoperable by the time they found it. The healer didn't apologize. Instead, she told the pack I was touched by dark magic. Cursed. Dangerous. I was beaten for it. Not severely, Omegas are too useful to damage permanently, but enough to teach me a lesson. Keep your mouth shut. Keep your strangeness to yourself. So I did. But Alexander, moon goddess, Alexander made that impossible. From the first moment I saw him, I felt it. Something wrong in his head, pressing, foreign, concentrated around his ears. It wasn't pain exactly, more like pressure. Like something was lodged where it shouldn't be, blocking, disrupting. And the sensation got stronger every time I was near him. It crawled under my skin, demanding attention. My fingers would itch with the urge to reach out, to fix it, to make the wrongness go away. I'd clench my hands into fists until my nails bit into my palms, forcing myself to ignore it. But ignoring it was like trying to ignore a splinter buried deep in your own flesh. Possible, maybe, but agonizing. The worst part? It wasn't just the wrongness I felt. It was him. My instincts, omega instincts that had never particularly cared about anyone before, reacted to Alexander like he was pack, like he was mine to protect, which was absolutely insane because I didn't have a pack, and even if I did, he sure as hell wouldn't be in it. He was an alpha king. I was nothing. But try telling that to the part of me that wanted to curl around him like a shield. On the third day, during afternoon court, everything came to a head. The throne room was more crowded than usual. Some visiting delegation from the Northern Territories, all posturing in territorial displays. The air felt thick with tension, with too many dominant wolves in one space, each one trying to prove they deserved to be there. I was supposed to be polishing the sconces along the eastern wall. Simple work, mindless. But I couldn't focus. Alexander sat on his throne, jaw tight, eyes tracking the argument happening in front of him. Two northern alphas were going at it, gesturing wildly, practically snarling at each other. He watched them with that same intense focus, reading their lips, their body language, and I felt the wrongness in him pulse like a heartbeat. It was worse today, sharper, like whatever was lodged in his ears was pressing harder, disrupting more. I could feel his frustration radiating outward, not because he showed it, but because I could sense the way his body was compensating, working around the damage. My hands trembled. The cloth I was using slipped from my fingers. Fix it. The thought wasn't mine. Or maybe it was, but it felt like something deeper, primal. An omega's instinct to heal, to soothe, to make things right for someone who mattered. Why did he matter? I didn't have an answer. I just knew that standing there, doing nothing while I could feel him struggling, felt like swallowing glass. Before I could talk myself out of it, I moved. I don't remember deciding to do it. One moment I was by the wall, the next I was weaving through the crowd, my heart slamming against my ribs so hard it hurt. Guards lined the perimeter, but they were watching the arguing alphas, not me. Why would they? I was furniture. I reached the dais. 3 steps separated me from the throne. From him. This is insane. This will get you killed. But my feet kept moving. Alexander's head turned slightly, his gaze cutting toward me. Those dark eyes locked onto mine, and for a heartbeat, the entire world narrowed to that look. Confusion flickered across his face. What was the invisible Omega doing approaching him? I should have stopped. Should have bowed, apologized, fled. Instead, I reached out and touched his ear. The reaction was immediate and catastrophic. The moment my fingers made contact, I felt the foreign object small, hard, deliberately placed. I'd expected resistance, but it came away easily, a tiny piece of enchanted metal designed to block sound, to keep him deaf. Someone had done this to him, on purpose. But I didn't have time to process that because the second the object left his ear, everything changed. Sound rushed in. I saw it happen in his eyes, the exact moment noise flooded his senses for what must have been the first time in years. Shock, overwhelming, disorienting shock. His entire body went rigid, every muscle locking up as the cacophony of the throne room slammed into him all at once. And then his eyes locked onto mine. Really locked on. Not just looking, seeing, recognizing, fixating. The room erupted into chaos around us. Guards surged forward, hands on weapons. The arguing alphas fell silent, staring. Someone shouted, "She touched the king!" I stumbled backward, my mind finally catching up to what I'd just done. Congratulations, Ivy. You've just touched a king without permission. That's definitely one way to quit a job. Permanently. but Alexander didn't move, didn't order my arrest, didn't do anything except stare at me with an expression I couldn't read: confusion and wonder and something sharp and possessive that made my stomach flip. Then he spoke. His voice was rough, unpracticed, like vocal cords that hadn't been used in years, deep enough to vibrate in my chest. You. Just that. One word. But it felt like a brand. The guards hesitated, looking between me and their king, clearly unsure what to do. The head maid had gone pale as death in the corner, mouthing what looked like prayers. I should have run, should have at least tried to explain. But I couldn't move, couldn't breathe. Because Alexander was rising from his throne, towering over me, and every instinct I had was screaming contradictory commands. Flee, submit, stay. He took a step closer, then another. The crowd parted like water, and when he stopped directly in front of me, close enough that I had to tilt my head back to meet his eyes, he did something that made the entire throne room collectively hold its breath. He lifted one massive hand, and gently, impossibly gently for someone so powerful, touched my face. His thumb brushed across my cheekbone, and I swear I felt electricity arc between us. "What?" he said slowly, voice still rough but growing stronger. "Are you?" I opened my mouth, closed it, opened it again. "Ivy," I whispered. I'm just Ivy." His eyes searched mine, and I saw the exact moment something shifted in them. Something clicked into place. Recognition, claim, mine. Oh no. Oh no. Because I knew that look. Every wolf knew that look. It was the look of an alpha who'd just found something he had absolutely no intention of ever letting go. And I, invisible, unremarkable, trained to disappear Ivy, had just become the sole focus of the most dangerous man in the kingdom. The guards didn't give me a choice. Thick fingers wrapped around my upper arms, not bruising, but firm enough to make it clear I wasn't walking out of that throne room on my own terms. The crowd watched in absolute silence as they hauled me away, their faces a mixture of shock, horror, and what looked disturbingly like pity. The head maid had actually fainted. Someone was fanning her with a folded piece of parchment. I kept my chin up as they dragged me through the corridors, even though my legs had gone numb and my heart was trying to hammer its way out of my chest. This was it. This was how I died. Executed for touching royalty, for breaking the most fundamental rule. At least it had been worth it, I told myself. At least I'd fixed the wrongness. Even if no one would ever know someone had deliberately deafened their king, at least he could hear now. Small comfort when you're about to lose your head. They took me deeper into the palace than I'd ever been. Past the servant quarters, past the public halls, into corridors lined with dark wood and tapestries that probably cost more than my entire bloodline had ever earned. The air smelled different here, richer, heavier with the scent of alpha dominance. We stopped in front of massive double doors carved with wolves mid-hunt. The king's chambers. Oh, moon goddess. They were going to execute me in his private rooms, quietly. No public spectacle. Just a quick death and a body that would disappear, and the other servants would whisper about what happened to the Omega who dared touch the king. The doors swung open. The guards shoved me inside and slammed the doors behind me. I stumbled, catching myself before I fell, and looked up to find Alexander standing in the center of the room. He'd removed his formal robes. Now he wore just dark trousers and a white shirt with the sleeves rolled to his elbows, revealing forearms corded with muscle and marked with scars. He looked somehow larger here, in this private space, more real, less like a distant figure on a throne and more like a predator in his den. His eyes tracked my every movement. I straightened slowly, forcing my spine to stay rigid, even though every instinct screamed at me to drop to my knees and bare my throat. Show submission. Maybe he'd make it quick. But I'd never been good at submission. Not really. It was a performance I'd learned, a mask I wore to survive. Underneath, I'd always been too curious, too stubborn, too unwilling to simply accept the role the world had assigned me. If I was going to die, I'd do it standing. Alexander moved toward me, each step deliberate and measured. The floor seemed to shake under his weight, or maybe that was just my imagination. He stopped an arm's length away, studying me with an intensity that made my skin prickle. Then he spoke. Why? His voice. Oh, moon goddess. His voice. It was deeper than I'd expected, resonant and rough from disuse, but growing stronger with each word. The kind of voice you felt in your bones, in your chest, vibrating through your entire body like the low note of a cello. I felt it everywhere. My knees went weak. Heat flooded through me, sudden and disorienting, and I had to lock my muscles to keep from swaying. This wasn't just hearing him speak. This was experiencing it, feeling it in every cell. What the hell was wrong with me? His eyes narrowed slightly. He'd noticed. Of course he'd noticed. Probably saw the way my pupils had dilated, the flush creeping up my neck. Why? He repeated, slower this time. Did you touch me? I swallowed hard, trying to force my brain to work through the haze his voice had created. There was something wrong, I said, and I was grateful my voice came out steady. In your ears, something blocking them. I could feel it. Feel it. Not a question. A statement, flat and skeptical. I can sense physical wrongness in people. The words tumbled out before I could stop them. It's not magic exactly. It's just something I've always been able to do. And you had something lodged in your ears. Something that didn't belong. I pulled the tiny metal object from my pocket, where I'd shoved it and held it out. It sat in my palm, small and innocuous looking, but I could still feel the residual wrongness clinging to it. Alexander stared at it for a long moment. Then his gaze cut back to my face, sharp enough to draw blood. Someone placed that there, he said. Deliberately. Yes, I hesitated. I think someone wanted you to stay deaf. The temperature in the room seemed to drop 10 degrees. Fury rolled off him in waves, not hot and explosive, but cold and controlled. The kind of anger that didn't need to shout because it knew it could destroy you with a whisper. Who knows about this ability of yours? No one. I learned a long time ago to keep it to myself. Why? Because people don't like it when omegas have anything that makes them useful beyond cleaning and serving. The bitterness leaked into my voice before I could stop it. They especially don't like it when omegas are right about things trained healers missed. Something flickered in his expression. Understanding, maybe. Or sympathy. He moved closer. Too close, invading the careful distance I'd been trying to maintain. I could smell him now. Cedar and smoke and something wild that made my omega instincts purr in a way they absolutely should not. You're not afraid, he observed. I'm terrified, I corrected. I'm just good at hiding it. The corner of his mouth twitched, almost a smile. Most people who touch me without permission end up begging for their lives. Would it help? No. Then why waste the breath? This time he definitely smiled. It transformed his face, softening the harsh lines and making him look younger. Devastating. What's your name? He asked. Eve. Just Ivy. He repeated my words from the throne room, and heat crawled up my spine at the sound of my name in that voice. Just Ivy, I confirmed. He reached out slowly, giving me time to flinch away if I wanted to. When I didn't move, his fingers wrapped around my wrist, gently, testing. His thumb pressed against my pulse point. Your heart is racing, he murmured, and there was something in his tone that made my stomach flip. Curiosity, interest, possessiveness. You're standing very close, I pointed out, trying to ignore the way my entire arm had come alive under his touch. And you're an alpha king. Most people's hearts race around you. Is that why? No, it absolutely was not why, and we both knew it. I met his eyes instead of answering. Let him read the truth there himself. His grip on my wrist tightened fractionally, not painful, anchoring. The guards, he said, not looking away from me, dismissed. I hadn't even realized they were still there, 2 of them stationed by the door, pretending not to watch this entire interaction. They hesitated only a second before bowing and leaving, closing the doors behind them with a soft click. Alone. I was alone with the Alpha King in his private chambers, his hand still wrapped around my wrist, his eyes burning into mine with an intensity that made it hard to breathe. I should let you go, he said quietly. Should, not would. Why don't you? Because, he said, thumb stroking once across my pulse, I don't understand what you are yet. I told you, I'm just… No. The word cut through the air like a blade. You're not just anything. You walked through my guards like they didn't exist. You touched me without permission and lived. You fixed something no one else even knew was broken. He stepped closer, until I had to tilt my head back to maintain eye contact. And my instincts are telling me things about you that make no sense. What things? I whispered. His free hand came up to cup my jaw, tilting my face toward him. The touch was gentle, almost reverent, completely at odds with the predatory focus in his eyes. That you belong here, he said. Near me, where I can. He trailed off, jaw tightening. Where you can what? Keep you safe. The words sounded like they'd been dragged out of him against his will. Protect you. Make sure no one ever hurts you. My breath caught. Those were alpha instincts. Protective, possessive alpha instincts directed at me? That didn't make sense. I was nobody, nothing. An omega without pack or family or any redeeming qualities beyond being good at disappearing. I don't need protection, I managed. His thumb brushed across my lower lip, and electricity sparked where he touched. Everyone needs protection, Ivy, even people who hide it well. The way he said my name low and rough and intimate made something in my chest crack open. This was dangerous. This whole situation was dangerous. I should pull away, should remind him I was just a servant, should do anything except stand here drowning in the dark heat of his gaze. But I didn't move, and neither did he. You'll stay, he said finally. It wasn't a question. In the palace, close, until I understand what this is. What is? His hand slid from my jaw to the back of my neck, fingers tangling in my hair. The gesture was possessive, claiming, and it sent shivers cascading down my spine. This, he said, whatever's happening between us, I need to understand it. And if I refuse? His smile was all teeth. You won't. The arrogance should have made me angry, should have made me want to prove him wrong out of sheer spite. Instead, it made heat pool low in my belly, because he was right. I wasn't going anywhere. They moved me into a room 3 doors down from Alexander's chambers, not the servants' quarters, not some forgotten corner of the palace. An actual guest room with a bed that didn't creak, walls that weren't water-stained, and windows that overlooked the gardens instead of the stables. The other servants looked at me like I'd grown a second head. I couldn't blame them. I looked at myself the same way, but Alexander had been clear. I was to stay close, available, and apparently that meant proximity that would make the court gossips lose their minds once they found out. If they found out. The lesson started the next morning. He summoned me to his private study, a room lined floor to ceiling with books he could now theoretically read without relying solely on sight. Sunlight streamed through tall windows, making dust motes dance in the air. Alexander stood by the fireplace, staring at the flames with an expression of profound concentration. It roars, he said when I entered. Fire. I always thought it would be silent. I moved to stand beside him, watching the way orange light played across his features. Everything makes sound, even things you'd think would be quiet. Show me. He turned to face me fully, and the intensity in his eyes made my stomach flutter. Teach me. So I did. We started simple. I walked across the room and back, letting my footsteps ring against the stone floor. Hear that? I asked. The rhythm of it. The way the sound changes depending on how hard I step, how fast I move. He nodded slowly, eyes tracking my movements. It's sharp, precise. Now you try. He moved with that same controlled grace he always had, but now I could see him actively listening to the sound of his own footsteps. Processing, learning. Heavier, he observed, than yours. You're bigger than me, I pointed out. Of course you're heavier. Something flickered in his expression. Amusement, maybe. Observant. We moved on to other sounds. I opened and closed the door, letting him hear the creak of hinges, the thud of wood against frame. Poured water from a pitcher into a glass. rustled pages of a book, tapped my fingers against different surfaces, wood, stone, metal, so he could learn the variations. He absorbed it all with the same intense focus he brought to everything, asking questions, making connections. But it was when I spoke that he became truly fixated. "Say my name again," he said during our third session. I'd lost count of how many times he'd asked. 20? 30? Alexander. His eyes drifted closed. Again. Alexander. Once more. "Are you memorizing my voice?" I asked, teasing gently. His eyes opened, locking onto mine. "Yes." The honesty in that single word stole my breath. "Why?" "Because," he said quietly, "out of all the noise in this world, yours is the only sound I want to be able to identify instantly. In any room, from any distance." Heat flooded through me. How was I supposed to respond to that? How was I supposed to maintain any kind of professional distance when he said things that made my heart try to break free of my ribs? I cleared my throat. "We should work on identifying sounds you can't see. Close your eyes." He obeyed without hesitation, and I tried not to think about the trust that implied. I moved around the room, creating sounds, scraping a chair across the floor, opening a window, flipping through a book. He identified each one correctly, his expression growing more confident, until I accidentally knocked a vase off a side table. The crash of breaking pottery made him flinch so violently he stumbled backward, hands flying up to cover his ears, eyes wide with shock. "What in the moon goddess's name was that?" he demanded. A vase. Breaking. I winced at the scattered pieces. "Sorry, that was an accident. It was aggressive. I couldn't help it." I laughed. "You command armies. You've probably been in countless battles. And a breaking vase is aggressive?" He lowered his hands slowly, shooting me a look that would have been withering if not for the slight embarrassment coloring his expression. "I've never heard a battle. For all I know, they're perfectly pleasant experiences." "They're not." "How would you know?" "I wouldn't," I admitted. "But I'm comfortable making assumptions based on the whole death and violence aspect." His mouth twitched, almost a smile. "The world is too loud. You'll get used to it." "When?" "Eventually. That's not specific enough." "Would you like me to give you a detailed timeline for auditory adjustment?" I asked, crossing my arms. "Because I don't think that exists." "Make one up. I'll feel better." I stared at him. Was the Alpha King pouting? 2 weeks, I said, fighting back a smile. "In 2 weeks, you'll stop flinching at normal household sounds." "Promise." "Sure, why not?" He studied me for a long moment, something soft and almost vulnerable in his expression. "You're not afraid to tease me." "Should I be? Most people are terrified of me. Most people haven't seen you jump at a breaking vase." This time he did smile, and it transformed his entire face, made him look younger, more approachable, devastatingly handsome. I looked away before I did something stupid like stare. The real shift came 3 days later. We were in his study again, working on distinguishing between similar sounds, different types of footsteps, various doors opening and closing. Alexander had been doing well, his confidence growing with each session. Then someone dropped something metal in the corridor outside. The clang echoed through the stone walls, sharp and unexpected and overwhelming. Alexander's entire body locked up. His breathing quickened, becoming shallow and erratic. His hands clenched into fists, trembling. Sensory overload. Too much, too fast, too intense. I moved without thinking, stepping directly in front of him. "Alexander, look at me." He didn't respond. His eyes were unfocused, his chest heaving. I grabbed his hands, both of them, and pressed them flat against my chest, right over my heart. "Feel that?" I said firmly. "Focus on my heartbeat. Just that. Nothing else." His fingers flexed against me, and I felt the exact moment his awareness shifted from the overwhelming cacophony around him to the steady rhythm under his palms. "Breathe with me," I instructed. "In and out. Match my breathing." I exaggerated my breaths, making them slow and deep. His eyes found mine, still wild but focusing. In, out, in, Out. Gradually. So gradually. I almost didn't notice at first his breathing began to sync with mine. His hands relaxed, spreading wider across my ribs, as if he needed more contact. "That's it," I murmured. "You're okay. It's just sound. It can't hurt you." "Too much," he managed, voice rough. "I know. But you're learning to filter it. Your brain will adjust. Right now, just focus on me." His thumbs moved, almost unconsciously, stroking along the curve of my ribs. The touch sent electricity racing through me, but I held still. He needed grounding, not distraction. "Your heart," he said after a long moment. "It's steady, even when mine isn't. Years of practice staying calm in terrible situations. Tell me." His breathing had almost returned to normal, but he hadn't moved his hands, didn't seem to want to. "Tell me something. Your voice helps." So I talked. About nothing, really. About the gardens I'd passed on the way to his study. About the way morning light looked different in the palace than it had in the village where I'd grown up. About how the cook made the best honey cakes I'd ever tasted. Meaningless words, but he hung on every single one. When he finally stepped back, his hands sliding reluctantly away from my body, something had changed in his expression. "I only calmed because of you," he said. "It wasn't a question. You would have been fine eventually." "No." He shook his head firmly. "It was you. Your voice. Your heartbeat. You centered me when nothing else could." The weight of that realization hung between us. I should have made light of it, should have brushed it off as coincidence or simple breathing techniques. But I couldn't lie to him. Not when he was looking at me like I'd just saved his life instead of just talking him through a panic attack. "Maybe," I said carefully, "we're good for each other." His hand came up to cup my face, thumb brushing across my cheekbone in a gesture that was becoming dangerously familiar. "Maybe," he agreed quietly. "Or maybe you're good for me and I'm just selfish enough to keep you close regardless. That doesn't sound very kingly." "No," he admitted. "It doesn't." But he didn't let go, and I didn't pull away. Because somewhere between teaching him to hear and watching him learn to navigate this new sensory world, something had grown between us. Something that went beyond duty or curiosity, or even the strange instincts that pulled us together. Something that felt dangerously close to need. He needed my voice to center him, my presence to calm him, my heartbeat to anchor him when the world became too loud. And Moon goddess help me, I needed to be needed by him, which was the most dangerous thing of all. Because needing someone, truly needing them, meant they could destroy you when they left. And everyone always left. But when Alexander looked at me like I was the only sound in the world worth hearing, I couldn't bring myself to care about the inevitable heartbreak. Not yet. Not while his hand was still cradling my face like I was something precious. Not while his eyes held promises neither of us was ready to speak aloud. So I stayed, and let myself need him back. The court noticed. Of course they did. You can't spend hours every day closeted with the Alpha King and expect people not to talk. Especially when that king had barely acknowledged anyone's existence for years, and now seemed to track my movements like a hawk watching prey. The whispers started small. Servants exchanging glances when I passed. Guards going quiet when I entered a room. But whispers in a palace are like cracks in a dam. They start small, but they spread. By the end of the first week, the entire court knew something had shifted. I felt their eyes on me constantly, assessing, judging, trying to figure out what made an insignificant Omega worth the Alpha King's attention. I wanted to tell them I was wondering the same thing. The lords were the worst. They'd never looked at me before, why would they? But now they watched me with calculation in their eyes, like I was a puzzle piece that had appeared on the board unexpectedly, and they needed to figure out where I fit in their political games. I hated it, but Alexander became something else entirely. It started subtly, a hand on the small of my back when we walked through crowded corridors, positioning himself between me and groups of lords without seeming to realize he was doing it, cutting conversations short when someone spoke to me for too long. Possessive behaviors he tried to mask as casual. I noticed. How could I not? The breaking point came during an afternoon court session, 2 weeks after I'd first touched him. I'd been standing near the wall, my usual position, though now I was there because Alexander had quietly requested it rather than because I'd been assigned cleaning duty. He'd wanted me close enough to help if the noise became overwhelming again. A guard approached me during a lull in the proceedings. Young, friendly-faced, probably new enough to the palace that he didn't know better. "You're Ivy, right?" he asked, smiling. "I've heard about you. The Omega who—" He didn't get to finish. A growl ripped through the throne room, deep, resonant, unmistakably alpha, the kind of sound that made every wolf in the vicinity freeze and bare their throat in automatic submission. Every conversation stopped, every head turned. Alexander was on his feet, his entire body rigid with tension, eyes locked on the guard who'd made the mistake of speaking to me. The temperature in the room seemed to drop 10 degrees. The young guard had gone pale, instinctively stepping back with his head lowered. "Your Majesty, I meant no. Leave." Alexander's voice was deadly quiet. Now, the guard practically ran from the room. Silence stretched, thick and uncomfortable. The lords exchanged glances, some shocked, others calculating. This was information, leverage, proof that the king had developed an interest in someone. And in the world of court politics, interests were weaknesses to be exploited. Alexander remained standing, jaw tight, hands clenched at his sides. He looked like he wanted to chase down that guard and make the territorial display more permanent. I should have been embarrassed, should have been mortified by the public spectacle. Instead, something warm and primal unfurled in my chest. He'd growled. For me, over something as simple as another man speaking to me in a friendly tone. That was alpha possessiveness, the kind that said mine in a language older than words. I met his eyes across the room, and I didn't lower my gaze, didn't apologize or show submission. I just looked at him steadily until some of the tension bled from his shoulders. The court session resumed, but the atmosphere had changed. Now everyone knew for certain what they'd only suspected before. The Alpha King had claimed me, even if he hadn't said the words aloud. After court, I found him in his study, pacing like a caged wolf. "You can't do that," I said, closing the door behind me. He turned to face me, eyes still carrying an edge of that territorial fury. "Can't do what?" "Growl at people for speaking to me. I'm not—" I hesitated, unsure how to finish that sentence. "Not yours?" But he'd made it clear he considered me exactly that. Not worth protecting? Demonstrably false. "Not what?" he challenged, moving closer. "Not important enough to cause political incidents over." "You're wrong." 2 words. Absolute. Unshakable. "Alexander, do you know what it took?" he interrupted, voice low and intense. "Not to physically remove that guard from your presence. The restraint required to simply order him away instead of making him understand on a visceral level that he's never to approach you again?" My breath caught. He was just being friendly. "I don't care." He closed the remaining distance between us, and I had to tilt my head back to maintain eye contact. Friendly, hostile, professional. I don't care about his intentions. All I know is that my instincts scream at me every time another male gets within 5 feet of you. That's not rational. "No," he agreed. "It's not. But rationality seems to have very little to do with whatever this is between us." His hand came up to cut my jaw, and I leaned into the touch before I could stop myself. "I'm trying," he said quietly, "to give you space, to not overwhelm you with the full force of what I'm feeling. But it's getting harder." "What are you feeling?" I whispered. His thumb brushed across my lower lip. "Everything. Possessive, protective, obsessed. I think about you constantly. Your voice, your scent, the way you look at me like I'm not a king, just a man." My heart was racing so fast I wondered if he could hear it. "You are just a man," I said. "A complicated, frustrating, occasionally terrifying man, but just a man nonetheless." He smiled, soft and genuine. "Only you would say that to my face. Someone needs to keep your ego in check. Is that your job now?" "Apparently. Along with teaching you to hear and talking you through panic attacks." His expression sobered. "I need you, Ivy. More than I should. More than is probably wise." I know, I admitted. I need you too, which is terrifying because people like me don't get to keep people like you. Why not? Because I'm nobody, an Omega without pack or position, and you're an Alpha King with a kingdom to run and political alliances to maintain. Eventually, reality is going to intrude on whatever this is, and you'll have to choose duty over. He kissed me, not gently, not tentatively. He kissed me like he'd been holding back for weeks, and his control had finally snapped. One hand tangled in my hair while the other wrapped around my waist, pulling me flush against him. And I kissed him back with equal desperation. It was fire and need, and two people who'd been circling each other finally admitting what had been obvious to everyone else. His mouth moved against mine with possessive intensity, and I opened for him, letting him in, claiming him right back. When we finally broke apart, both breathing hard, he pressed his forehead to mine. "Never," he said fiercely. "Tell me you're nobody. Never say I could choose anything over you. Because, Ivy, you've become the most important thing in my world, and I will burn it all down before I let anyone take you from me." I should have been frightened by the intensity of that declaration. Instead, I felt safe for the first time in my life. But safety was an illusion in a place like this. I learned that 3 days later when I overheard a conversation that shattered everything. I'd been returning from the kitchens late evening, most of the palace asleep, when I heard voices coming from one of the small council chambers. The door was slightly ajar, lamplight spilling into the corridor. I should have kept walking, should have minded my own business. But I heard Alexander's name, and my feet stopped of their own accord. "Was a necessary measure," a male voice was saying. "Lord fucking someone." I didn't recognize which one specifically, but the entitled arrogance was universal among them. The king was becoming too independent, another voice agreed. Too difficult to manipulate. Keeping him deaf ensured he relied on us for information, for interpretation. My blood ran cold. "And now this Omega has undone years of careful work," the first voice continued, dripping with disdain. "We paid good money for those enchanted blocks. Had them placed years ago when he was still young enough not to question it. We'll handle her." "How?" "The king is obsessed. He won't let her out of his sight." "There are ways. Accidents happen, especially to low-born Omegas who overstep." I pressed my hand over my mouth to stifle my gasp. They'd deliberately deafened him, kept him isolated, dependent, controllable, for years. And now they were planning to kill me for fixing what they'd broken. I should have run, should have gone straight to Alexander, told him everything. But my feet wouldn't move, because part of me, a small, scared part that I hated, whispered that maybe he wouldn't believe me. Maybe he'd think I was being paranoid or seeking attention. Maybe the lords were too powerful, too entrenched, and exposing them would just make me a target without protection. No, I couldn't think like that. Alexander had proven over and over that he valued truth over politics, that he trusted me, and I trusted him. I backed away from the door carefully, making no sound, and headed toward Alexander's chambers. My heart pounded so hard I could feel it in my throat. The stakes had just skyrocketed. This wasn't about teaching a king to hear anymore. This was conspiracy, treason, assassination plots, and I was standing right in the middle of it. But as I raised my hand to knock on Alexander's door, one thought crystallized in my mind with absolute clarity. I wasn't leaving. They could threaten me. They could plot. They could try to make me disappear like I'd never mattered. But I would not abandon him to silence again. I would not let them steal his voice, his hearing, his autonomy. Not while I still breathed. He'd said I was the most important thing in his world. Well, he'd become that for me too. And I protected what was mine. Alexander answered the door himself, still dressed despite the late hour. His eyes widened fractionally when he saw my expression. What happened? I told him everything. Every word I'd overheard, every implication, every threat. He listened in absolute silence, his expression growing colder and more dangerous with each sentence. When I finished, he pulled me into his chambers and closed the door. "Names," he said quietly. "I need their names." I didn't see them, just heard. "Describe their voices." I did. and watched recognition flicker across his face. He knew exactly who they were. "This explains so much," he said, more to himself than to me. "The way certain lords always seemed to know things before I did. How decisions I never made somehow became policy. They've been controlling me for years." "I'm sorry." His eyes snapped to mine. "Why are you apologizing?" "Because learning you've been manipulated by people you trusted is infuriating," he interrupted. "But not your fault. Ivy, you gave me back my hearing. You exposed their control. You're not the cause of this pain, you're the solution." I wanted to believe that, but fear had wrapped itself around my chest like iron bands. "They want me dead," I said quietly. "They said accidents happen to Omegas who overstep." Something savage crossed his face. "They can try." He meant it. I could see it in the set of his jaw, the fury burning in his eyes. He would protect me with everything he had, but even kings couldn't be everywhere at once. I didn't sleep that night. Neither did Alexander. We spent hours planning, strategizing, trying to figure out how to expose the conspiracy without triggering a civil war. By morning, we thought we had a plan. We were wrong. The summons came during breakfast, formal, sealed with the council's mark. Alexander was required to attend an emergency session, immediately. His jaw tightened as he read it. "This is a trap. Then don't go. If I don't, they'll claim I'm unfit to rule, that I'm being controlled by—" He looked at me. "By you. Let them think that. Your safety matters more than their opinions." "No, Ivy. My authority is the only thing keeping you safe right now. If they undermine it, we're both vulnerable." He was right. I hated it, but he was right. "I'm coming with you," I said. "Absolutely not. Alexander, they want you isolated and vulnerable. Walking into a room full of conspirators is exactly what they're hoping for. And leaving you alone with them is better?" We glared at each other, both stubborn, both terrified for the other's safety. Finally, he sighed. "Stay close to me. Don't leave my side for any reason." I nodded. The council chamber was packed when we arrived. Not just the usual lords, but what looked like half the court. This wasn't a private session. This was theater. Alexander's hand found mine as we entered, his fingers lacing through my own in a gesture of public claim that made several lords' eyes widen. We took our positions, him in the central seat, me standing just behind his right shoulder where I could see the whole room. Lord fucking someone, Lord Carver. I'd learned his name was stood and cleared his throat. "Your Majesty, we've called this session to address a matter of grave concern to the stability of the kingdom." "Speak plainly, Carver," Alexander said, his voice carrying that edge of command that made everyone in the room straighten unconsciously. "The Omega." Carver's gaze cut to me, cold and calculating. "Ivy. She stands accused of witchcraft, manipulation of the crown, and undue influence over your Majesty's judgment." The room erupted in murmurs. My stomach dropped, but I kept my expression neutral. They were moving faster than we'd anticipated, attacking before we could expose them. "On what evidence?" Alexander demanded. "She touched you without permission and lived," another lord spoke up. "She claims mystical abilities to sense wrongness. She has somehow convinced you to abandon years of established protocol to keep her constantly at your side. The pattern is clear. She has bewitched you." "That's absurd," I said before I could stop myself. Every eye in the room turned to me. Carver smiled. It didn't reach his eyes. "The accused speaks out of turn. Further proof of her inappropriate influence." "She's not on trial," Alexander growled. "Isn't she?" Carver pulled out a document, unrolling it with theatrical precision. "We have testimony from servants who claim she uses dark magic, from guards who've witnessed her strange hold over you, even from healers who say her so-called abilities are impossible for a common Omega. Lies. All of it carefully constructed lies designed to paint me as a threat." I felt Alexander's fury radiating outward like heat from a forge. His hand tightened on mine. "This is a farce," he said. "This is protection of the crown," Carver countered smoothly. "Your Majesty, we understand that you may feel attached to this Omega, But the good of the kingdom must come before personal desires. We cannot allow a witch to manipulate our king. I haven't manipulated anyone, I said, louder this time. My voice didn't shake. I wouldn't let it. Then explain your abilities, another lord demanded. How does a low-born Omega possess powers beyond trained healers? I don't have powers. I have sensitivity to physical wrongness in others. It's not magic, it's instinct. Instinct that allowed you to remove an object from the king's ear that no one else detected? Carver's smile widened. An object that you claim was deliberately placed to keep His Majesty deaf? Do you realize how convenient that story sounds? How perfectly it positions you as his savior? The trap was closing. Every word I said to defend myself made me sound more guilty. Alexander stood abruptly, and the room fell silent. Enough, he said. I will not sit here and listen to my lords accuse an innocent woman of crimes they manufactured. Your Majesty, with respect, your judgment may be compromised. My judgment, Alexander interrupted, his voice dropping to that dangerous quiet that made smart people stop talking, is perfectly intact, and it tells me that this entire proceeding is designed to remove someone who threatens your control. Carver's mask slipped for just a second. We only seek to protect you. By lying? By fabricating evidence? By threatening someone under my protection? We have done no such. You had me deafened. Alexander's words cut through the chamber like a blade. For years, enchanted blocks placed in my ears to keep me isolated, dependent on you for information, to make me controllable. The room exploded into chaos. Lords shouted denials. Others demanded proof. The noise swelled until Alexander slammed his hand on the table, and the crack echoed like thunder. Silence! They obeyed. Ivy removed those blocks, Alexander continued. She gave me back my hearing, and rather than thank her, you've conspired to destroy her because she disrupted your manipulation. That's a serious accusation, Carver said, but his voice had lost its confident edge. Without proof, I have the blocks. I've had them examined by independent mages. They confirm the enchantment, and I have witnesses who've agreed to testify about the conspiracy in exchange for leniency. He was bluffing. We hadn't had time to gather that evidence. But Carver didn't know that. I watched the calculation happen behind the Lord's eyes. The weighing of options. The realization that this had spiraled beyond his control. This is absurd, Carver tried one last time. Even if what you say is true, the Omega is still dangerous. She has too much influence over you. For the good of the kingdom, Alexander interrupted, moving to stand beside me. You will all understand something very clearly. He took my hand again, raising it so everyone could see the gesture. Ivy is under my personal protection. She is untouchable. Anyone who harms her, threatens her, or speaks against her answers directly to me. Not to the council, not to the courts, to me. The possessive claim in those words sent shivers down my spine. Your Majesty, someone protested weakly. Such favoritism toward an Omega. Is my right as king? Alexander finished. And my choice as a man. She saved me from your machinations. She gave me truth when you fed me lies, and I will not allow anyone in this court to punish her for having more integrity than all of you combined. Silence. Then, slowly, lords began to bow their heads, acknowledging his authority, backing down. All except Carver, who stood rigid with fury barely contained. This isn't over, he said quietly. No, Alexander agreed. It's not, because now we're going to investigate exactly how deep this conspiracy runs. How many of you were involved? What other lies you've told? And anyone found complicit will face appropriate consequences. He looked around the room, meeting eyes, letting them see the alpha in him fully unleashed. This session is dismissed. Except for you, Carver. And you, Lord Brennan. And you, Lady Ashford. The three of you will remain for questioning. The three who'd been in that room. The three whose voices I'd heard plotting. Carver's face went white. As the chamber emptied, Alexander turned to me. His hand was still holding mine, and he showed no intention of letting go. Are you all right? He asked quietly. I nodded, not trusting my voice. You were incredible. he said. You didn't cry, didn't beg, didn't break. You stood there and defended yourself with more dignity than they deserved. I just told the truth, which is more than most people in this court can say. His thumb brushed across my knuckles. I meant what I said. Anyone who harms you answers to me. I know. Do you? His eyes searched mine. Do you understand that I'm claiming you publicly, in front of the entire court? There's no taking that back, Ivy. Everyone now knows that you're mine. My heart stuttered. Is that what I am? Yours? Yes, he said simply. If you'll have me. If you want this us, despite the danger and complications and the fact that I'm apparently terrible at politics. I laughed, surprising myself. You're the Alpha King. You're supposed to be good at politics. Clearly, I've been delegating to the wrong people. His expression sobered. I'm serious, Ivy. I'm claiming you. Not just as someone under my protection. As mine. My mate. The word hung between us, heavy with meaning. Mates were forever in wolf culture, chosen by instinct and fate, and something deeper than logic. That's fast, I whispered. I know. But I've never been more certain of anything in my life. He cupped my face with his free hand. You're worth saving, Ivy. Worth protecting. Worth keeping. And I'm selfish enough to do all three. Tears pricked at my eyes, but I blinked them back. I'm worth saving? You saved me first. That was different. No, he said firmly. It wasn't. We saved each other. And I'm not letting you go. I looked at this man, this powerful, complicated, fierce man who'd somehow chosen me out of everyone he could have had. And I chose him back. Good, I said, because I'm not leaving. He kissed me then, in front of the 3 remaining lords, in front of the guards at the door, in front of anyone who might be watching, claiming me completely. And I kissed him back with everything I had, because he was right. We'd saved each other, and I'd be damned if I let anyone tear us apart. The questioning took hours. Carver and the others denied everything at first, but Alexander was relentless. He'd spent years watching people lie to his face, reading their body language because he couldn't hear their voices. Now he had both, and the conspirators had no chance. By the time he was finished, they'd confessed to everything. The enchanted blocks, the years of manipulation, the plans to eliminate me, all of it documented, witnessed, irrefutable. They were taken away in chains. The sun had set by the time we finally left the council chamber. The palace halls were quiet, most of the court having retreated to whisper about the day's revelations in private. Alexander's hand hadn't left mine since the trial. He held on like I might disappear if he let go. We walked in silence back toward his chambers, guards trailing at a respectful distance. The weight of everything that had happened pressed down on me, the accusations, the public claiming the conspiracy finally exposed. I'd won. We'd won. So why did I feel like I was about to shatter? Alexander must have sensed it because he dismissed the guards the moment we entered his chambers, closing the door and sealing us in private. Ivy, I need a minute, I said, moving to the window and pressing my palms against the cool glass. My hands were shaking. Now that the adrenaline was fading, reaction was setting in. I'd been accused of witchcraft, nearly condemned, saved only because Alexander had been willing to expose a conspiracy and publicly claim me as his mate. Moon goddess. He'd called me his mate in front of the entire court. Breathe, Alexander said quietly from behind me. Close, but not touching. Giving me space even though I could feel how much he wanted to reach for me. I sucked in air trying to steady myself. They wanted me dead. I know. And you claimed me. Publicly. Do you understand what that means? What you've just tied yourself to? An incredibly brave woman who saved my life and my kingdom? I turned to face him. An Omega with no pack, no family, no political value whatsoever. You've just made me a target for every ambitious noble who thinks they can use me to manipulate you. Let them try. His voice was flat, absolute. They'll learn very quickly what happens to people who threaten what's mine. You can't just... I can. He stepped closer, and I saw the exhaustion in his eyes, the toll the day had taken. I'm the Alpha King. I can claim anyone I choose as my mate, and I choose you. Why? The question burst out of me, raw and desperate. Why me, Alexander? You could have anyone. Someone with connections, with power, with something to offer besides the ability to sense when people are broken. He was quiet for a long moment, studying my face like he was trying to memorize it. Then he dropped to his knees. I stopped breathing. The Alpha King, the most powerful wolf in the kingdom, was kneeling in front of me, his head level with my stomach, his eyes looking up at me with something that looked terrifyingly like reverence. "What are you doing?" I whispered. "Get up. You can't, kings don't kneel." "I'm not kneeling as a king," he said quietly. "I'm kneeling as a man asking the woman he loves to choose him back." Loves. The word hit me like a physical blow. "You don't love me," I said, but my voice shook. "You barely know me." "I know your voice was the first sound that made me feel alive instead of just existing," he said. "I know you touch me without fear. I know you stood in front of the entire court and defended yourself with more courage than most of my warriors possess. I know that when the world becomes too loud and overwhelming, your heartbeat is the only thing that can center me." His hands came up to rest on my hips, gentle and grounding. "I know that you're brilliant and stubborn, and you make me laugh even when I'm furious. I know that you see me, not the king, not the alpha, just the man underneath all of it. And that man is completely, irrevocably in love with you." Tears spilled down my cheeks. I couldn't stop them. "Alexander, I'm asking," he continued, his voice rough with emotion. "Not commanding, not demanding, asking. Will you stay? Will you choose this? Choose me knowing what it means. The danger, the scrutiny, the fact that my life is complicated and messy, and you'll probably spend half your time wanting to strangle me?" A laugh bubbled out of me, watery and broken. "You're really selling it." "I'm being honest." His thumbs stroked small circles against my hips. "I can't promise you easy, Ivy, but I can promise you that I will protect you with everything I have, that I will value your voice above all others, that I will spend every day trying to be worthy of the gift you gave me when you returned my hearing. I didn't do that to earn gratitude. I know. You did it because you saw someone in pain and you couldn't walk away, because you're fundamentally good in a way I'm not sure I'll ever fully understand." He pressed his forehead against my stomach, and I felt him shudder. "Please, choose me. Choose us, I'm begging you." I slid my fingers into his hair, cradling his head against me. A king was begging. For me, the absurdity of it warred with the overwhelming rightness. Because I'd already chosen him. Maybe I'd chosen him the moment I first felt the wrongness in his ears and knew I had to fix it. Maybe it was when he'd first spoken my name in that devastating voice. Maybe it was in one of the 100 small moments between when he'd asked me to teach him sounds, when he'd calmed only to my heartbeat, when he'd growled at a guard for speaking to me. I'd been choosing him all along. "Get up," I said softly. He stiffened, and I saw fear flash across his face. He thought I was rejecting him. "Get up," I repeated, tugging gently on his hair. "Because if you're going to kiss me, I'd rather you do it on your feet, where I don't have to worry about the symbolism of a kneeling king." Hope blazed in his eyes. He rose in one fluid motion, and suddenly he was towering over me again, his hands framing my face with trembling gentleness. "Is that a yes?" he asked. "That's a yes to everything," I said. "To staying, to choosing you, to being yours if you'll be mine." "I've been yours since the moment you touched me," he said. "I just didn't know it yet." Then he kissed me. Not like before, not with the desperate hunger of two people finally admitting their want. This was different, softer, reverent. His lips moved against mine like I was something precious, something he was afraid of breaking. One hand cupped my jaw while the other slid into my hair, angling my head to deepen the kiss slowly, carefully. I melted into him, my hands fisting in his shirt to keep myself steady. He kissed me like he was learning me, memorizing the shape of my mouth, the way I responded to different pressures and angles. When I sighed against his lips, he made a low sound in his chest that I felt more than heard. "That sound," he murmured against my mouth. "Make it again." So I did, And he swallowed it with another kiss, deeper this time but still controlled, still gentle despite the tension I could feel thrumming through his body. "Alexander," I breathed. "I'm learning you," he said, pressing kisses to the corner of my mouth, my jaw, the sensitive spot below my ear that made me gasp. "Every sound you make, every way you respond. I want to know all of it." His restraint was extraordinary. I could feel the leashed power in him, the alpha instincts demanding he claim and possess, but he held back, giving me gentleness when he could have taken. "You don't have to be careful with me," I said. "Yes, I do." He pulled back just enough to look at me, and the intensity in his eyes stole my breath. "You're the most important thing in my world, Ivy. I'm going to be careful with you for the rest of our lives." "That's a long time." "Not long enough." He kissed me again, and this time I felt the restraint starting to crack. His hands tightened in my hair, his body pressed closer, the kiss growing more demanding. I matched him, rising onto my toes to get closer, my hands sliding up his chest to wrap around his neck. He groaned, actually groaned, and the sound vibrated through both of us. "The sounds you make," I whispered against his mouth. "I want to learn all of those too." His control shattered. He kissed me harder, deeper, one arm banding around my waist to lift me slightly off the ground. I wrapped my legs around his hips instinctively, and he carried me to the nearest wall, pressing me against it while his mouth never left mine. This was the alpha I'd expected, dominant, possessive, overwhelming, and I loved every second of it. But even in this, he was careful. One hand cradled the back of my head, protecting it from the wall. His body surrounded mine, but he was conscious of his strength, never pressing too hard. When we finally broke apart, both breathing hard, he rested his forehead against mine. "I love you," he said again, in case that wasn't clear. I laughed breathlessly. It was fairly clear. Good, because I planned to say it often. "I love you too," I admitted, the words coming easier than I'd expected. "Even though you're overbearing and possessive and probably going to drive me insane." "Probably?" "Definitely." He smiled that devastating smile that transformed his whole face and kissed me again, softer this time, sweet. "Stay with me tonight," he said. "Just stay. I need to hold you, to know you're safe." I nodded, and he carried me to his bed, laying me down gently before curling around me like I was something that needed guarding. His arms wrapped around me, solid and warm and safe. "Thank you," he murmured into my hair, "for choosing me, for staying, for being brave enough to touch a king you'd been warned away from." "Thank you for seeing me," I replied, when I'd spent my whole life being invisible. "I'll always see you, Ivy. You're the only thing I want to see." We lay there in the darkness, learning each other's breathing, each other's heartbeats, and for the first time in my life, I felt like I'd found home. Not in a place, in a person, in the Alpha King who'd knelt for me, in the man who loved me enough to let me choose, and I chose him. Every time, forever. 3 months later, I stood beside the throne, not behind it, hidden in the shadows like before. Beside it, in full view of the entire court, in a position that left no doubt about what I was to the Alpha King, his mate, his chosen, his equal. The court had adjusted, some genuinely, others through gritted teeth and forced smiles. I didn't particularly care which. The ones who'd been part of the conspiracy were gone exiled, imprisoned, or executed depending on their level of involvement. The new lords who'd replaced them were younger, less entrenched in old power structures, more willing to actually serve rather than manipulate. Alexander had restructured everything, the council, the advisory system, even the way information flowed to him. He listened now, truly listened, to voices that had been ignored for years. Servants, guards, common wolves with grievances. He heard them all. And when he needed grounding, when the cacophony of ruling became too much, his eyes would find mine. I'd learned to read that look, the slight tension around his eyes that meant he was overwhelmed, the way his jaw would tighten when someone was lying, the softening of his expression when he was pleased. and he'd learned to read me just as well. Right now, a minor dispute was being presented, something about territory boundaries between two packs in the eastern regions. Both alphas were gesturing wildly, talking over each other, getting nowhere. Alexander listened patiently, his face neutral. But I saw the irritation building. I touched his hand where it rested on the arm of the throne. Just a brush of my fingers, barely noticeable to anyone watching. He glanced at me, and I raised an eyebrow slightly. Patience. The corner of his mouth twitched, almost a smile. He turned back to the arguing alphas and raised one hand. Silence fell immediately. "Enough," he said, his voice carrying easily through the hall. "You've both made your positions clear. Here's what's going to happen." He outlined a solution that was fair to both parties, addressing the root causes of their dispute rather than just the surface arguments. Both alphas looked surprised and grudgingly satisfied. When they bowed and left, Alexander's hand found mine, lacing our fingers together in full view of everyone remaining. "You stopped me from losing my temper," he said quietly. "You weren't going to lose your temper. You were going to make a decision while irritated, which is different. Still not ideal." "No," I agreed. "But you would have figured it out on your own. I just sped up the process." He brought my hand to his lips, kissing my knuckles. The gesture was possessive and tender all at once, and it never failed to make my heart stutter. "How did I function before you?" he murmured. "Poorly, apparently." He laughed, a real laugh that echoed through the throne room and made several people smile. The Alpha King laughing was still novel enough to be noteworthy. The session ended shortly after, and we walked back to our chambers together. Our chambers now. I'd officially moved in 2 months ago, after a mating ceremony that had been equal parts beautiful and terrifying. The palace hallways felt different now. Familiar, safe, home. "You're thinking loudly," Alexander said as we entered the suite. "I'm thinking normally. You're just very perceptive." "With you, yes." He pulled me against him, arms wrapping around my waist from behind, chin resting on top of my head. "Tell me." I leaned into his warmth. "I was just thinking about how different everything is now. Good different or bad different? Good. Terrifying sometimes, but good." His arms tightened. "What's terrifying?" "How much I have to lose now." The admission came out quietly. "I spent my whole life having nothing, being nothing. And now I have everything. You, this place, a purpose. It's a lot." He turned me in his arms, tilting my chin up so I had to meet his eyes. "You're not going to lose me," he said fiercely. "I'm not going anywhere, and neither are you. You can't promise that. Things happen, then we'll face them together." He cupped my face with both hands. "Ivy, I know you're used to losing things, to people leaving or dying or deciding you weren't worth keeping. But I need you to understand something." His thumbs brushed across my cheekbones, gentle and grounding. "You're not easy to walk away from. You're not forgettable or replaceable. You're essential. To me, to this kingdom, to everything we're building here, and I will spend every day for the rest of our lives proving that to you if I have to." Tears pricked at my eyes. "That's a big commitment. I'm aware. I'm very committed." I laughed wetly. "That was a terrible joke. You're smiling, though, unfortunately." I wrapped my arms around his neck. "I love you, even when you're overbearing and possessive and refuse to let me worry in peace. I love you too, especially when you're stubborn and brave and pretend you don't need the same reassurance you give everyone else." He kissed me then, slow and deep and thorough. The kind of kiss that said, "I'm here and I'm staying and you're mine," without needing words. When we finally broke apart, he rested his forehead against mine. "You know what I realized today?" he asked. "What?" I can't remember what silence felt like anymore. Not real silence. Because even when the world is quiet, I hear you. Your breathing, your heartbeat, the little sounds you make when you're thinking. You've become the soundtrack to my life. My chest ached with the sweetness of it. That's really beautiful, actually. I have my moments. Apparently. We stayed like that for a while, just holding each other, existing in the space we'd carved out together. Eventually, he pulled back enough to look at me properly. "Do you ever regret it?" he asked, touching me that day, starting all of this. Never. The answer came without hesitation. Do you regret the best thing that ever happened to me? No, Ivy. I don't regret you. I never could. Later, as we lay in bed with moonlight streaming through the windows, I thought about everything that had led us here. The warnings I'd ignored, the touch that should have killed me, the conspiracy we'd exposed, the trial where I'd nearly lost everything, and the choice I'd made to stay. People whispered about us, of course. They always would. The Alpha King and his Omega mate. Some called it a fairy tale. Others called it scandal. A few still muttered about witchcraft when they thought no one was listening. Let them talk, because they'd never understand what I'd actually given him. It wasn't magic. It wasn't manipulation or seduction or any of the dark things they'd accused me of. I'd given him sound. His hearing, yes, but more than that, I'd given him the ability to truly listen, to hear not just words but meaning, to understand that strength didn't mean shutting people out. I'd reminded him how to be present in his own life instead of just surviving it, and he'd given me something far greater in return. A place where I was never invisible again, where my voice mattered, where I could be soft without being weak, strong without being hard, loving without fear of loss. He'd given me a home, not in the palace, though that's where we lived, but in him, in the safety of his arms, the certainty of his love, the knowledge that he'd chosen me and would keep choosing me every single day. Alexander stirred beside me, pulling me closer even in sleep, like his body knew it needed to keep me safe even when his mind was resting. I pressed my hand over his heart, feeling the steady rhythm beneath my palm. This man, this powerful, complicated, fierce man who'd knelt for me was mine, and I was his. Completely. Forever. The court feared what I'd given him. Feared the power of an Alpha King who could finally hear every truth and lie spoken in his presence, but they'd never truly understood. What I gave him was never power. It was sound, the ability to experience the world fully instead of from behind a wall of silence. And what he gave me was something I'd searched for my whole life without knowing it. A voice that mattered. A place that was mine. A love that saw me, really saw me, and chose me anyway. I was Ivy. Just Ivy, an Omega who dared to touch a king. And somehow, impossibly, that had been enough. Not because I'd changed him with magic or manipulation, but because I'd reminded him of something he'd forgotten in all those years of silence. That being powerful didn't mean being alone. That listening was just as important as being heard. That sometimes the bravest thing you could do was let someone in. He'd learned to hear again, and I'd learned that I deserved to be heard. Together, we were building something neither of us could have created alone. A kingdom that listened. A love that lasted. A future where neither of us would ever be invisible again. And that was worth every risk I'd taken. Every fear I'd faced. Every moment of doubt. Because in the end, I hadn't just given a king his hearing. I'd found my voice. And he'd made sure the whole world would listen. Thank you for listening to another emotional, magical shifter romance here on Tina Romance Library. If you enjoyed today's story, don't forget to like the video, subscribe to the channel, turn on notifications, so you never miss more powerful, heart-gripping romance stories.